Okay, I think we're live. John, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. All right. So I was really excited to get this topic going, whether or not there is any such thing as a MTHFR gene mutation, and what the significance is. I know we had a controversial email that was given out and by the Medical Medium. And so I thought that'd be a great conversation for us today, John. So I guess how's the best way to get into this? I mean, I have a lot of notes here today. And, I think like you and I talked about the other day, we're in agreement with a lot of things. And I think the easiest way that you can explain just sort of the preface of the MTHFR gene mutation is the highway and traffic analogy. So maybe we can address first the fact that he said that MTHFR gene mutation doesn't exist. But what we do agree on is that the misinformation being put out there can be really detrimental to someone's health if they don't understand the proper information. So let's start there.
Okay. Yeah. And like you said, you have a bunch of notes. I have a bunch of notes, and I actually threw them on slides if you want me to share those to kind of go through.
Sure.
So I can go and share screen here. And then that way we kind of hit some of the bullet points that were in that kind of article or email that went out about the MTHFR gene mutation to kind of really hit the high points in it, and then really kind of talk about, big picture of this, kind of the things that we talk about. And like you mentioned, in terms of the traffic on the highway, is pretty much in alignment with what he's saying. He's saying that your health issues, the symptoms you're experiencing, isn't due to this mutated gene, but it's due to, liver congestion. It's the viral load, it's the chemical exposure, because that is putting traffic on a highway. Now, there's some things in the email, the article that, I kind of disagree with based on what the literature and the science and what I've seen in clinical practice. But on the grand scheme of things, kind of his point with this is understanding that, don't get married to this MTHFR story. Understand that the environment we live in is the bigger piece of the puzzle. The stressors that's putting more traffic on a highway is the issue. So, I made some bullet points here on some of the things that I just want to, we can kind of have this outline, and, I'll throw my thoughts in there. If you want to kind of throw your thoughts, we'll kind of work through these kind of bullet points and go from there. So the first thing is, read through the thing where, MTHFR controversy, does it really exist, is, the fact that there is no such thing as an MTHFR gene mutation. Now, one thing I will say about that, I hate the word mutation, because mutation thing, sometimes we can take the connotation of that is like, it's something that happens, at some point in your lifetime, where it's like, okay, you're going along, and all of a sudden, like at 30 years old, all of a sudden this MTHFR gene mutated. The thing is, that we look at it is, I like using the terminology, variant or SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphism. And these are things we're born with. This makes up our genetic predisposition. This is what makes me different from you, in terms of what's passed down to us from our family, that makes up our biochemistry, it makes up our function. Okay. And so if nobody had any of these SNPs, basically everybody would pretty much be very similar, be the same. Okay. So there are differences from one person to the next. So we do know that people do have gene SNPs. They have these polymorphisms that make up their biochemistry. And some of these polymorphisms, affect function, because what it does is it allows our pathways to possibly work slower, work faster, and possibly is the key word there. Okay. Now, what his point was is there's no such thing as the MTHFR gene mutation, that there's another issue that's triggering the test results in itself, which I kind of disagree with that. I've seen people, pass down from, family components, and you kind of see some consistencies. You see something where maybe they had a genetic test like a decade ago, and it's very similar. I think the genetic component we test in genetics, that is what you're born with. It's not going to change. There's nothing in the research, there's nothing I've seen in testing that indicates that you're going to change the SNPs that you are passed down with when you are born, okay, when you're developing, all right? There are other factors in this, but those other factors that are being discussed, which we'll talk about at the tail end of this, are affecting function. They are affecting how your biochemistry works, how your liver is detoxing, but I don't feel that they're actually affecting the test result in itself. And I don't know if there's anything you want to kind of add to that thought right there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you and everything you've said so far. And I think that in his defense, he is talking about empowering the patient and not having this foregone conclusion that you're doomed, that you
Right.
have this genetic mutation or this genetic fault that isn't going to allow you to thrive. I agree with that idea.
Oh, absolutely.
But like what you're saying too is that I think that you have to look at both, as we'll get into, because you do want to impact the cars on the highway, right? Which is what we're talking about, the environment. But the reality is, if there's a part of the highway that is physically or structurally slow, just because there's not a lot of width of the highway, we want to be able to stack the cards in our favor and not just randomly say we got to do this or that with the protocols, because I'm sure, just like he'll tell you, he has challenges with some of his more difficult clientele as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why not use all that information as you possibly can to be able to glean as much information as you can. And that's what we've done with our Unlocking Your Genetic Type, is to be able to say, hey, listen, there's these environmental triggers that can really place problems on a altered efficiency. And I think that needs to be said, John, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of when you say a mutation, which I don't like the word either, it's basically, the example I always use is those old credit card processing machines that would go and copy the card and create a transparency. And if that card goes in there sideways, you're not going to have a good copy. Calling that a mutation is a bad thing, right? I mean, it's
Right.
just it's a less efficient machine to copy an important piece of information, which in this case in our body is an enzyme, and that enzyme is used for very key cellular functions like detoxing and fighting infections, coordinating an immune response, making your neurotransmitters, repairing your cells, dealing with stress, all of those things. So yeah, I mean, just I agree with you there in terms of that area. So go on and then we'll kind of our thought process.
And like I said, big picture, a lot of the, when you sent that over to me yesterday saying, hey, did you read this? You see this, hey, we need to kind of talk about it. I kind of read through and I was like, big picture, I kind of agree with everything he's saying, in terms of the environment, the epigenetic factors that are the bigger players. But the thing is like you mentioned, we can't discredit our genetic predisposition. And I always use the example of patients that, genetic SNPs, looking at our genes allows us to determine possibly which rabbit holes we have to go down. That then allows us to determine, are there possibilities of detox? Is there things with the immune response that we look at virus issues? Because as we know, there are certain stressors like chemicals and viruses, the things that he's talking about that affect certain enzymes that really gravitate to really disrupt certain, things that deal with liver detoxification or methylation activity that allows you really to kind of determine, all right, hey, there's possibly a perfect storm going on here. And that's what, where we kind of got to put our diligence in investigating. So in the article, he starts talking about, genes are not, genes are not to blame for chronic and mysterious illness. I kind of agree with that at some level. It's not only our genes, and a lot of people, are saying it's like, you got MTHFR, it's like, oh, it's doom or gloom aspect. It's not the case. Just because you have an MTHFR defect does not mean that you absolutely need to take methylfolate. It just means that there is a possibility that there could be some weakness, and that possibility increases when we have a toxic accumulation or previous viral issues or strep or Lyme, or the list can go on and on and on. One thing he said in there too is about family members who display similar health concerns. This is not there's no genetic component. I kind of disagree with that, because if you've got a family history of people with the same complaints that are passed down from generation to generation, I agree that some viral components and things would be passed down through vertical transmission and all that stuff. But the thing is there's got to be a genetic component. That's just kind of a common sense thing, that if you got a family history of X, Y, or Z, yes, there's a genetic component. And we look at genetic testing, you start seeing that, wow, there are SNPs, there is genetic weakness that we're predisposed to, that has been passed down that can correlate that, because that allows us to really hone in and narrow down the rabbit holes to really streamline, what we're looking at in terms of address thing. In there it states the ability to convert or methylate or detox has nothing to do with gene mutations. Well, yes and no, and it's kind of the same thing. It's not only genes. All these genetic mutations or these SNPs tell us is that, you've got a narrowed highway, possibility. You got possibility for the enzymes to work slower, to work faster. But the thing is, if there's no cars on the road, it does have nothing to do with the mutation. It could be other components. And so when we kind of use this analogy here at the end of this, when we talk about traffic and lanes, that's kind of like our thought process in this. It's about your genetic predisposition is telling you how many lanes you have for traffic to flow. And then all these other things that we discuss, and he's really discussing big picture in this article about Lyme and viruses and chemicals, are the things that put traffic on the highway. And that's where the problem is, because you can address these gene SNPs all you want, but if you're not doing anything to decrease the amount of traffic, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's what I see in my practice is everybody kind of really gets married to the genetic aspect and thinks like they found all the answers, although it does give you a whole lot of insight. But if you've got a bunch of cars on the road, you got a tractor trailer that's turned over on the highway, you can support that gene SNP all you want, and you're not going to get very far. Okay. There's another reason why you're not methylating properly. I 100% agree. It's not only the genes, and he goes on to say that these other reasons are viruses and chemicals that are causing the liver to get congested. That's causing impaired detoxification and impaired methylation, which it's true, because all that's doing is it's putting more traffic on the highway, because some people can have impaired methylation with or without these gene SNPs. You put enough cars on an 8-lane highway, traffic's eventually going to slow down and stop. All right. He says genes can never become mutated. Well, that's kind of like saying that, you don't have these SNPs and all of a sudden, like at age 20, they develop. Like I said, you're kind of born with these, and it is what makes up our genetic predisposition. And it kind of comes into, context in terms of like that mutation is kind of a bad, a bad phrase to use with this, and something I don't like. But to say these genes are never mutated, well, we know that's not the case. We know that we are born with these variations that individually make us up, and where the problem lies is the stressors. Okay, and that's what creates a perfect storm. He also says that something is triggering a faulty MTHFR gene mutation test, and then goes a little bit further, saying that you can kind of heal the test. You decrease the viral burden, you decrease the chemicals, then you can kind of change the test. I haven't seen anything that indicates that's possible. Who knows? You never say every human body, but I don't think that these other factors are triggering a faulty test. These are things that we are born with. It makes up our genetic predisposition, but these other things are definitely triggering the symptomatic issues that we are experiencing due to having some of these genetic factors that are causing some impaired weakness going into it. Okay. And then the biggest thing is, he says it's an issue with the liver. Well, absolutely. Where does methylation activity take place? Where does detoxification take place? It all takes place in the liver. MTHFR function in terms of methylation activity takes place in the liver. So yes, whether you have the SNPs or you don't have the SNPs, this comes down to liver function in general. So, he's absolutely right. It is an issue with the liver, regardless if it's only a SNP or if it is the chemical burden, but it definitely is a liver issue across the board. All right. Anything you want to add on any of those, Joel?
Yeah, it's an interesting point when you have people that don't know very much, and I'm not saying he doesn't, but you have this the medical community that don't know very much about MTHFR, and he raises this. It's a new frontier, and the information that we're getting is always expanding our minds as practitioners, especially when we can apply it clinically. But I find like you sort of have that two sides of everything. You have the, hey, I don't know much about it, and I'm going to say it's not a big impactor. And then there's the other camp that feels like they know a lot about it, and it is a big impactor. And I think really the happy medium is that like you're talking about, where on the one hand, he's saying, well, I want you to be empowered. I don't want you to think of it as your foregone conclusion. You have this mutated thing that's not even such a thing. It's environmental. But then on the other hand, I think you throw a little bit of the baby out with the bathwater with what we're talking about in terms of how can we really know what someone's susceptibilities are, and how can we use that, like you said, understanding how the environment overlaps with that to really stack the cards in our favor. And I think that's the problem when you try to create an argument of it's not important when it is important, but not for the reasons you thought that it wasn't important. The other last thing that I would say too is when we do the software that we're using, John, and you can look, there's 39,000 people in that database now, right? I thought there was 25. There's 39,000 people in that database. And what's really cool about it is it puts all the people that we run genetic SNP tests on. So they're going to be people that have challenges, right? You're not getting like the elite rowers that are going to their doctors to say, hey, I got to be super competitive and healthy. Tell me what's wrong. It's more of the reactionary crowd, right? Like something's not working. I got to go check out my genes. I want to see if there's something there. So anyways, you have some gene SNPs where you can see a percentage of the population have all the variants, right? And then you have a certain couple genes where very, very few people of the population have some variants. And so what I've come to conclude on that, John, maybe you can tell me if you agree or not, is some of these gene SNPs were actually environmentally favorable, right? I mean, they were things that helped us survive, right?
Yeah,
if we
absolutely.
warrior-like genes that allow us to maintain a fight or flight for a longer period of time with lack of nutrients, lack of food, lack of shelter, lack of whatever, and it meant we survived, then great. But here's what's happened now is that I don't think we really envisioned all of these cars that we were putting on the highway or these environmental triggers that were going to make us put this potential load on these evolved gene SNPs that were sort of passed down from generation to generation. And now they're not as favorable anymore. They're going off all the time, right? Because of these other environmental triggers. So I just kind of wanted to put that in there as well. So yeah, I don't know what your commentary on that is.
No, I completely agree with that, because you would look at, genetic reporting, it seems like each generation looks a little bit worse in terms of the amount of SNPs that are there. And the thing is the body is a self-healing, self-adapting organism. And the thing is the body is adapting to stressors, for future generations, saying there's more chemical burden, there's more, things we're exposed to, there's more EMF exposure there, so the tolerance has to change. So some of these SNPs that are, developing, that are being passed down, they're being passed down for reasons, and then what it comes down to is like, then what is that toxic load that the body can tolerate on our chemistry? And when that toxic load gets too much, then that's where symptoms start manifesting. And, you can use the bucket of water analogy. You're putting water in the bucket fast, you're taking it out. Eventually the water is going to fill up over the edge and spill onto the floor, and you've got a mess. And that's where usually our chronic symptoms or mystery illnesses set in. Okay. So back to a couple of things here, this is kind of, we already kind of mentioned this. Methylation problem is not due to the MTHFR gene mutation, and the positive test is due to chemicals and viral load. I really don't think the test itself, is like, if you run an MTHFR test and you come back with mutations, it's like the chemicals of the viruses cause that test to be faulty or cause that SNP. These are things you're born with. What happens is the chemicals and the viral load is putting stress on our biochemistry. And then also the possibility to reverse the MTHFR test. I have not seen one yet. I've had people that have had MTHFR, tested a decade ago because of fertility issues, something along those lines. And we run more advanced genetic tests. The MTHFR looks exactly the same. And I have not come across another practitioner that has seen any of these genetic components heal up. But like you said, never say never about the human body. And one of the goals is you're going to try and create a healthy environment for future generations. You're going to create a healthy environment for people that are trying to get pregnant and have a family, so that, hey, you can actually heal these things for future generations, so they don't pass down the weakened or mutated based variants to developing child. So here's our thoughts. I kind of list these out because this is kind of what our whole your genetic type and kind of our thought process is about, and like we already stated a lot of these things. We are born with these SNPs. It's our genetic predisposition that makes up our biochemistry. Okay. So it's not the virus, it's not the chemical component that's causing the SNPs. It's like we're born with them. But the thing is that's your genetic predisposition. And if you have certain weaknesses there, and now you add the viruses and chemicals into the mix, then that creates a perfect storm, and then that leads to the symptoms. So the chemicals, the viruses, the liver congestion, all this puts stress on our genetic predisposition, and leads to the symptoms, okay? And a lot of times, as the example of, if we have these SNPs, which we're born with, which we do, okay, And then why don't we experience symptoms from like day one? You know, it's usually, you know, later in life, you know, it's like teen years or 20s or 30s, or it's after pregnancies or after a traumatic event or after an illness that now we're left with chronic states. It's because we've built up the traffic to where now the traffic has come to a stop and we can't function. Okay. And usually the things that if people have genetic issues from day one, like, you know, like true mitochondrial diseases or things like, you know, those are things that are detected through like, you know, geneticists, and people have those chronic issues. And those aren't the people that we typically work with. The people we typically work with are the people that, hey, at some point in their life, something happened, something changed, and they're not feeling and function the way they did. Well, they went into it with these genetic factors, and now the chemicals and the viral load and liver congestion has caught up with them. That's leading to their symptoms. So these epigenetic factors express the gene mutation, okay, or express the SNPs, all right? These stressors cause these genetic factors to become relevant at some point in our life by putting more traffic in the highway, leading to decreased function and symptoms. And so it kind of goes back to this whole thought process of genetics versus epigenetics. All right. So our genes, we talk about traffic. And so if somebody's listened to this and they've never heard of us use this analogy, I'm going to use it again because it is right on par with kind of how we feel and how we think about how our genes and how our environment coexist that lead to things that we experience day in, day out. All right. So our genes basically make up our infrastructure of our biochemistry, basically how many lanes we have available for traffic to flow. So if we have a normal genetic component that's passed down from mom and dad, you can visualize that you have 8 lanes for traffic to flow. And if you have one of these mutations or these SNPs or these variants, you start decreasing the amount of lanes for traffic to flow. So if you have one parent pass down a normal gene and the other parent pass down a mutated copy of that gene, you go from 8 lanes to 4. And if both parents pass down mutated copies of the gene, you go from 8 lanes down to 1. But we talk about how much traffic's on the highway. Because if there's no cars on the road, it doesn't matter if you have 8 lanes or 1, there's not an issue, right? If you got 1 car on the road, if you got 3 cars on the road, you know, it doesn't matter how many lanes because there's not enough cars to slow traffic down. But what happens is you start putting a whole bunch of traffic on the highway. It doesn't matter if you have 8 lanes, if you have 4 lanes, if you have 2 lanes, eventually that's going to get caught up with you. Now, if you just kind of think about common sense, you know, obviously if you have less lanes for traffic to flow and you start putting a bunch of cars on the highway, you know, the less lanes you have available, the quicker and the more congestion you're going to have in traffic. And that's where we use our genetics to say, all right, this is where a high probability can happen because we've got genetic weakness because the highway narrows down and the symptoms you're experiencing, you know, really kind of falls in tune with some of these genetic factors where that highway narrows down. And now we can kind of put on our detective hat and go try and investigate Lyme and heavy metals and chemicals and viral load and how that is putting traffic on the first page. Because the whole goal is not to change the amount of lanes because we don't think we can do that. And then thinking that we can change a test, right? Meaning that, hey, we can rerun an MTHFR gene test and think now all of a sudden it's going to be normal. We are not going to change the amount of lanes. At least we don't think we can change the amount of lanes. You're not going to go from 1 lane and then do a liver detox and then all of a sudden now you have 8 lanes. You still have the amount of lanes that are available, but what you did through the liver detox or the viral protocol, whatever you did, is you took traffic off the highway, and now you've only got a couple cars on the road, and now traffic's working more efficiently, and so now you're recovering. Okay.
That's a good point. I was just going to say, John, too, like you have to take it in context with who's the patient, right? So you think about the ones that are really with it and they've done the work. They're seeing practitioners, they're spending thousands of dollars. They've done the gut cleanse, they've done the, you know, the parasite stuff, they've done the food sensitivities, they've got off certain foods. They may have even done a Lyme protocol or a heavy metal protocol, and they're not moving the needle, right? I mean, we see these people all the time where there's got to be something that's missing. Right. And so to tell them, hey, listen, don't worry about MTHFR and don't worry about the fact that you're a mutant and you're running around like, you know, an X-Men ready to join like the, you know, the evil, whatever, is doing it a disservice. And I think that the people in this category that are looking for answers, they're looking for things and hope And I think we're speaking the same message as the medical medium, just providing a little more insight as to, hey, the lanes of highway are really important too. And yes, the traffic is really important too. And you know, like you and I have talked about, we tell people things on those genetic interpretations that are experiencing that perfect storm of lots of highway lane closures, lots of Super Bowl being let out and putting on the, you know, on the highway, and lots of not moving traffic. And then we look at things that, hey, you have a real predisposition here. And these are the ways that we can, like you said, look under the rocks and confirm with tests. And most importantly, design a customized program, right? I mean, that's what it's about, where you see people improve where they haven't improved. So that's really what we've done, you know, who's listening to this now. And that's why we thought this would be a great segue into what we've created in terms of, all right, well, how do we simplify this? How do we make it so that you're not spending hours upon hours upon hours understanding what genetics are, what MTHFR is, and now someone's telling me I don't need to worry about it and it's not real. So what would you tell them, John, in terms of what we've designed and how it can really simplify the process for them?
Yeah, so this is what we do in practice. We work with people that have these stressors, heavy metals, viral issues, bacteria, Lyme, but put a heavy focus into genetic predisposition, because that does tell us which rabbit holes or to look down and which rocks to turn over, and it really kind of gives us an idea of how to kind of marry those two worlds to enhance recovery. And so what we've done is based on what we've seen in clinical practice and looking at thousands of genetic reports, kind of classified that most people fall into a genetic type. And so we have this kind of concept of people have a genetic type, and there's 7 core genetic types, and you can find out your genetic type by going to yourgenetictype.com, and we have a free course there that people can look through and to determine which genetic type they are. And what's great about it is we have resources that you can go through some self-study components and really kind of decipher really intense genetic information and kind of take it down into bite-sized pieces. All right. And from that, we have, a course available that allows you to determine your genetic type, but then what are the key genes with each of those genetic types based on, symptoms you're experiencing, things of that nature. And then more importantly, what are things you can do to investigate this further from a clinical side of things, in terms of laboratory testing to confirm the relevance, as well as, nutrient, diet recommendations, things that based on your genetic type. And so what that's designed to do is really 2 pieces, kind of what we talked about, determine what your genetic type is based on where your highway narrows down. All right. And then now we've got protocols that you can do to start removing traffic. And it's as simple as that. But the thing is you've got to determine where your highway narrows down, because the thing is, if you've got a heavy metal burden or you've got a viral load, that is going to affect your body, okay, pretty much anything and everything. But where it hits harder are the areas where the highway narrows down. And that's basically what somebody's genetic type is they've got areas or tendencies where the highways narrow down that falls them into one of these 7 core genetic types. And then once they determine that, now they have a better idea how to address that in terms of removing the traffic, and allowing that traffic to become more self-sufficient in terms of flowing going forward. So you can go to yourgenetictype.com. You can follow us on social media at Your Genetic Type. On our website, there's courses there. There's a free course that allows you to learn to determine what your genetic type is. And then we have courses available to learn more about this and how to help you recover.
Yeah, awesome. And wherever you're watching this, if you're watching this from a Facebook page, feel free to type in your comments. John and I will go through that. Unfortunately, with Zoom, we don't get to see that real time. Also, there'll be different links to click on depending on where you're watching this. And really, our goal is to help you navigate and empower you and make you realize that you're not mutated, that there is a combination of a perfect storm out there where just you're not moving the needle, like we like to say, and the body is very forgiving. We always believe that the body can heal given the right environment and circumstances. It's just that you're so close yet so far, and you're 1 or 2 distinctions from getting your health back. and John and I see it in everyday practice. So awesome conversation today, John. I think that's all I got for us, and we'll carry on again next week, right?
Sounds great.
Awesome. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.